The World Wide Web is one of man's more recent technological and social advancements. This system of connections, web pages and users has allowed people from all over the world to come together regardless of race, nationality or creed. This system is used for things as trivial as staying in touch with loved ones to sharing all it is that we know about the world. There have been implications of this, however. The Christian faith, currently the largest religion with over 2 billion followers globally, has felt a large impact in recent years with growing levels of positive atheism, demanding both evidence and questioning the Bible's integrity. This spread has been aided in many ways as well as hindered in some by the form of the internet. I just wish to look over some of these factors to see if we truly have advanced beyond belief.
He would show you, but why do you think God would try to prove himself to someone who has no faith? God does not need to prove himself. God knows that he exists.
And the way that he created us is just amazing. But for those that don't believe that there's a God, they actually think, again, in the whole Big Bang Theory, that we just happened. At first there was nothing, and then it exploded. That right there should be enough to make you go, wait, how can nothing explode? So
I want to say to you atheists out there, don't buy the lie. You are not filled with hope. You have no hope. Your invented hopes, your created hopes, those hopes that you think are so meaningful to you, they're just selfish efforts to fill the void that is inside of you.
God is my Savior and my God, my one and only God. I love Jesus, I'm a Christian and forever will be. So you'll soon understand that when you go to hell for the bad things you've done and still are doing, you'll shout for God's forgiveness, but he shall ignore you because you did not believe and honor him on your days on earth. So please, get a grip.
Christianity, the belief of the biblical God and that Jesus Christ was the Saviour of man sent down from the heavens to be sacrificed to his Father, who, incidentally, is himself. This story all seems so simply foolish to begin with. Add in 2,000 years of blood-stained history, along with a long and terrible past of denying rights to various citizens, only to have them pried free one by one, and you have an area of controversy. That is why to some people, both atheists and theists, the Bible can be viewed as a hush-hush topic, especially in the case of real life, save a few key figures speaking out about it. However, a recent trend with the growth of online activity has allowed anyone and everyone to voice their opinion and to share information. This has given way to both advancements and losses with the Christian faith. And that is exactly what the first two segments of this video shall be on. Cyber preaching shall be on the ideas around how the internet has in turn helped the Christian faith to spread, how it has rallied together many of the small-time as well as some of the larger theologians in form of almost an entire Christian community here on the internet. Then the segment titled Social Renaissance will look at the exact opposite, seeing how in very much the same way that the European Renaissance acted to depart power from the Catholic Church, that the internet is doing much the same to Christianity on a whole. Then afterwards we shall be taking a look back at the term culture war and just what exactly is meant by this term. We will be homing down on 3 specific tactics deployed by various large Christians here on YouTube and hopefully expose them for what they are. We made the decision to home down on YouTube for much of this documentary due to the amount of content which is uploaded by both the atheist and Christian communities, leading to increased likelihood of conflicts. With all that said, let's start with cyber preaching. While street preaching has not totally disappeared, it certainly has lessened a great deal over the past several hundred years. One possible reason for this is higher expectations from life, leading to preachers demanding better lifestyles, and therefore the Christian community being able to support less of these materialistic preachers in their fancy cars and homes. The internet, however, has offered a cheap and easily accessible digital stage to which any Christian can reach from the very comfort of their own homes. This has led to a magnitude of evangelical preachers appearing left, right and centre in attempts to spread their beliefs and preach the good news onto others. Though this may not always be entirely effective, it works on much the same principle as door-to-door preaching, a sort of fail-fail-win system where, for each X number of people who visit their blogs or watch their videos, they may snare some emotionally unstable individual and be able to convert them in this weakened state over to Christianity, seducing another believer to the faith. Online Christian communities also offer some strength through numbers. Whilst they may differ to varying degrees, all Christians must agree on the core belief around the Bible, its God, and Jesus, therefore creating an immediate group of allies. This differs from atheists who, by definition, only in fact share the single core lack of belief in God, so are more likely to disagree on various topics and methods when arguing. That's not to say it doesn't happen with Christians, just that it's less likely. This grouping gives many Christians the feeling of justification in what they believe, that somehow the truth is more secure with the greater number of people they can get on their team. Sadly for them, this is not how the truth works, but it does give them that boost that their view is correct, if there are many more just as deluded as them. It was the same for the idea that the earth was flat or at the centre of the universe, with the sun revolving round us. In history, the majority of people actually believed these things, and not surprisingly, it was supported by the Bible. However, we know now that these ideas are of course false. The world is really spherical and revolves around the sun, not the other way round. Then of course we enter the biblical marketing that has exploded thanks to the internet. Nowadays, every church, ministry or sect with a website sells Jesus merchandise to the masses. Anything from Jesus shirts to holy water. Don't forget to pick up a solid silver Christian fish also. This marketing provides churches in real life with solid hard cash that can then be used off the internet to fuel protests or make their church politically active, whether small or large scale. This in turn can have a ripple effect further along, leading to the miseducation of children on ideas such as New Age biblical creationism, or to the further denying of rights to a number of demographic groups such as women or LGBT members, all stemming back and aided by this online peddling of the Christian faith to its followers. The internet can also offer a direct way to spread false information and pseudoscience in the way by false articles or fraudulent digs or findings, such as those made by Ron Wyatt, who claims to have found the remnants of the chariots in the Red Sea at the supposed site of the crossing. What Christian websites always fail to mention is he never brought back any pieces, he never gave the exact location, and it was never confirmed that the photos were his or taken at the place he stated they were, before he sadly passed away. Another clear case of false information was spread by creationist Juby. One of his most outstanding claims revolves around the eggs of a Troodon, which are laid out in 2 neat rows, side by side. Juby, however, quoted them as oviraptor eggs and pointed out how the 2 rows of Troodon eggs don't match the usual circular layout of an oviraptor nest. He therefore claimed that the Troodon eggs had in fact been laid by an oviraptor fleeing the global flood in Genesis, clearly having zero understanding of anything he is discussing. However, many Christians to this day are still attempting to use these claims in trying to prove the historical accuracy of the Bible and the events of both Genesis and Exodus, along with New Age creationism. It's therefore very saddening to say that 46% of Americans believe in New Age creationism according to the 2012 Gallup poll on the origins of man. This is where we come to the end of this segment of the video, and now head on over to take a look at the social renaissance. While street preaching has decreased and the levels of secularism have slowly risen in the West, there are still high levels of hostility towards atheists. This was shown in the US 2012 Gallup poll, in which, when asked the question on whether they would vote for a well-qualified candidate who happened to be one of the following, atheists came on bottom with 46% stating they would not. To go along with this, there are several cases of atheists being threatened with violence, forced out of homes by landlords, or even targeted by entire communities for not being a believer. Not to mention being reminded daily, every time that you reach into your wallet or have to swear an oath, that you live in a conservative, theistic country, along with the fact that 6 states in the US have laws in place to prevent an atheist taking public office. So it may come as no surprise that with the growth of the internet and communication, atheist communities have formed and for the most part thrived. The new media platform allowed for those in the US to voice their opinions with much of the support from places such as Europe and Oceania, which are far more secularized than the United States. But what does all this growth mean for Christianity globally? Well, one of the biggest impacts comes from the direct challenge of positive atheism. Atheists wishing to further the ideas of secularism onto the government, as is demanded by the Constitution under the ruling Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, which has become more commonly known as the wall of separation between church and state, as written in the letter by Thomas Jefferson. This part of the American Constitution was quite clearly broken in 1954, where the words "under God" were added to the Pledge of Allegiance, as well as in 1957 when "in God we trust" was added to paper currency. Now, thanks to the internet, both atheists and non-atheist secularists have been able to gather, even rally at times, to challenge these unconstitutional acts held out by the church inside of the government. Though they don't have many spokespeople in office, they are certainly getting their voice heard. Alongside this, the internet has allowed for the distribution of information. While similar to the way that Christianity has spread, more often this spread of information is detrimental to the faith. Christians from the likes of Ian Juby to William Lane Craig are unable to speak without being shown up for exactly what they are doing, using fraudulent evidence and out-of-date arguments. It is then no surprise that more and more Christians are stating that we shouldn't take the Bible literally. If that is so, then what does this mean of their God's existence? Isn't that then just a metaphor, along with Jesus and crucifixion? Why do they expect others to live by their metaphor if they then go on to threaten others with a metaphorical hellfire? This excuse should be taken at best what it is, an excuse. It's only meant to protect the believer from the scrutiny of what the Bible says, whilst they themselves tell others to follow it. Science and facts have always been the worst enemy of the Christian God, as seen with the cases throughout history, such as Galileo. So it comes as no surprise that with the aid of this international database of information, Christianity finds itself as just a pool of ignorance, rapidly shrinking. Creationist claims on Exodus, as well as many New Testament claims, have been debunked, or at least found totally lacking in evidence. With the growth of the internet and various aspects of false information, people are also beginning to question more, to demand the evidence as opposed to just bowing down to some Bronze Age book. To coincide with this, counter-apologetics are also advancing each year. Many arguments for and against religion have become like steps to a dance routine, everyone going through the same motions each and every time. But with higher levels of communication, atheists and other non-Christians are coming up with new cases and theological questions to challenge these beliefs, putting the Christian apologists through their paces and just possibly getting them and other Christians around them to just think over their position. These are only a few of the reasons why, in the developed parts of the world, Christianity and even religion as a whole has been shrinking. In America alone, the number of people who claim that religion is an important part of their lives has dropped down from 65% in 2009 down to 40% in 2012, showing some signs of progression at the very least. This is where we come to the end of this segment of the video, and now head over to take a look at culture war. What is a culture war? More specifically to this video, what is a culture war when yelled to the rooftops by supposedly oppressed Christians? The term culture war is thrown around by numerous apologists whenever disagreeing views appear far superior or far more moral than their own. It's a term which, like militant atheists, is used to dehumanize the opposition, making them seem militant, which almost instantly gives off a negative image. This saying is therefore highly overused by members of the Christian faith. As has been shown, there is nothing warlike about what is happening, at least not from the atheist side. We won't mention much about the children's soldiers for Christ as wanted by children pastor Becky Fisher. We will, however, be exploring some of the techniques deployed by several Christians here on the internet in this so-called culture war.
Censorship is a suppression of speech or communication by varying means. Censorship can be used responsibly to protect citizens and their rights against such things as threats or racism. However, more often when dealing with Christians on the internet, it is used in an attempt to silence or distort opposition. Online communities can have their systems abused in this manner by false flagging or filing false DMCAs to scare off opposing views and make them seem untouchable by criticism. DMCA abuse is a common occurrence on YouTube. However, censorship also takes other forms, such as denying comments at all or only allowing comments that do not challenge the views of the uploader. This removal gives an inflated sense of the video uploader's credibility and reputation due to the lack of opposition. Whilst this is permitted in the rules, no honest intellectual would do this. When a content maker edits out parts of the response to their video, they run the risk of misrepresenting their opposition, as what remains is an inevitable distortion of the original reaction. This distortion is probably much weaker than it would have been if left undisturbed. A very well-known case of this comes from a man by the name of JP Holding, a half-rate apologist who routinely resorts to censorship, misrepresentation and childish ad hom attacks. He's been called out on these actions before, however his fallacious reasoning is defended with yet more fallacious reasoning. His channel, Tecton TV, is a very well-known apologist channel. One of Holding's arguments is that his YouTube page is like a special library, and this gives him the authority to remove whatever he disagrees with as the person in charge. No one disputes that there is no rule against cowardice and intellectual dishonesty. However, it is an interesting trend. Christianity is becoming increasingly insulated, unable to stand up to scrutiny. Another rationalization is that the comments posted are too poor to be allowed. Without even picking apart the reasoning, it is sufficient to point out that when Holding sees a comment he finds poor, he always responds with something about stupid fundy atheists. This is not the behavior of someone who wants to argue against stronger objections. Censorship is the last resort of a broken intellectual. Christianity was debunked before it was even legal to scrutinize it. The arrival of the internet has sped up this process, and Christianity's defenders are tacitly agreeing to this.
Burden of proof is a term used when identifying which person in a debate has a duty of supplying evidence in support of their claims, such as those made on something's existence. In any case, since it is logically impossible to prove a negative, the person with the positive claim has the burden of proof. This makes sense, since what evidence could someone present short of 100% knowledge of the contents of the universe to prove that something didn't exist within it? Burden sounds onerous, but isn't. Without it, you can only go as far as claiming that something is as likely as not, that you don't know. Burden of proof is something one must assume in order to change someone else's mind. In science, every proposition must be capable of being correct, and so must be distinguishable from its opposite by physically testing the claim. If you said, "The sky is blue," this is a testable claim. You would go outside and check the colour of the sky. Were it not blue, you'd know the statement was wrong. What about something not testable, such as, "The colour of love is green"? How would you prove or disprove this? You can't claim to know that the colour of love is green simply because it's impossible to show otherwise, besides from the fact that love isn't something that can be said to have colour. This is the mark of any hypothesis. It must be practically testable. If you cannot discern between the truth or falseness of a proposition, you cannot claim anything other than, "I don't know." The way science does this is with a null hypothesis, the negative of the hypothesis, which it is possible to disprove. For example, in order to prove that aliens exist, I would seek to disprove their non-existence by finding evidence which disproves it. In the case around God, we only have to consider positive statements on existence. This claim is the hypothesis God exists. For any hypothesis to be meaningful, it must also be testable, and so be able to form a null hypothesis. This is its corresponding negative statement, which, when dealing with the existence of an item, is non-existence. For example, God does not exist. If there is insufficient evidence, or none at all to support the hypothesis, both reason and scientific method dictate that until sufficient evidence is found, if ever, the best you can say is that you don't know. Therefore, unless the claimant wishes only to establish their own ignorance on a matter, it is up to the person making the claim that something exists to then supply the evidence, or propose a method of distinguishing that it does exist from that it doesn't, if they want to get past and say anything more than, I don't know. Perhaps, though, science is too high a barrier. In terms of testable claims, God exists is a hypothesis that isn't even wrong, and this is not a compliment or a suggestion that it is right. The hypothesis is not useful since it cannot provide an answer. It is purely an assertion. In light of this cul-de-sac of logic, it is not uncommon for a God believer to attempt to turn this over onto the atheist, a person with a lack of belief in God. They will often attempt to claim that it's up to the non-believer to supply evidence against the existence of God, claiming that it is the atheist making the positive statement on God's non-existence. As stated, this is a logical fallacy, which has been dressed up in many different forms. Possibly one of the best known on the internet is, what evidence do you have that atheism is true and accurate? As is most frequently used by Rich Allen, also known as ShockofGod, and his followers. This question, at its core, seeks to displace the burden of proof off of the group seeking to convince someone of the existence of something, onto those whose adherence to reason and logic can't accept a thing's existence on assertion alone. The best that ShockofGod can achieve is to flee, claiming that the absence of evidence for the non-existence of God permits the claim that a God must exist. This is akin to claiming that since love cannot be proven not to be green, it must therefore be green. Bertrand Russell defeated ShockofGod and his illogical goons before any of them were even born, back in 1952 inside of an article titled Is There a God? In Illustrated Magazine. Russell's analogy was simple. Imagine that there is a teapot circling the sun somewhere between Earth and Mars, and this teapot was too hard to be seen even by the most advanced telescopes, making it unfalsifiable and just as irrational. Any reasonable person would dismiss this idea as ridiculous. But why? Well, because all of the scientific evidence at man's disposal tells him that this is highly unlikely, that teapots have never been launched into space, and there is no reason to believe it. This is not to say that he would be unwilling to be convinced. If the balance of evidence shifts the other way, if the claimant presented evidence of a Soviet teapot launching program, that might add weight to their claim. Without it, the best they can do is, I don't know, and I would agree with them. At reason's most generous, there is no difference between Russell's teapot and God, except, of course, the genocidal tendencies and pure hatred for women, gays, and all people of differing religious beliefs. The atheist, though, stands with the evidence, and all of that points to a universe unaffected by the will of an imaginary God. People, such as ShockofGod, are quite happy believing in this illogical idea and demanding others to disprove them, as it protects their own disgraceful hatred towards these groups, as both ShockofGod and many of his followers have been seen to have. It allows them to say, it's not us who hate women, gays, or other religious people, it's God. Well, until you have a method for differentiating your hateful God from something entirely made up, since you choose to shirk the burden of proof, you are stuck with the one thing you do know, nothing.
A false intellectual is a person with a below-than-average intelligence and understanding on what topic they claim to be knowledgeable on. This can lead to numerous embarrassing claims which are put forward as actual fact or evidence while trying to validate their position, or often quoting what other people have stated, like an apologetics game of telephone with nothing new to add to the discussion. One of the highly used tactics by false intellectuals is to strawman their opponent's position in such a way that it seemingly allows them to debunk their opponent's totally fabricated position without providing any evidence. The strawman argument often being so ridiculous to begin with. One very common example is the classic, "So something came from nothing," as thrown around by many large and small theologians without an understanding of the field. This statement is of course false, and the scientific understanding of nothing may be surprising, as it isn't the same as the colloquial sense of nothing, but in fact supercondensed matter, which then expanded at the beginning of our known universe, as is stated by such theories as the Big Bang. What came before this is unknown to all people, and that does include all. Another place very often strawmanned by Christians is of course evolution. The reason for this is to challenge the story of Genesis and creation is to then challenge the idea of original sin. To challenge the idea of original sin is then to challenge each and every other story in the Bible leading up to Christ's death to negate this original sin. So it's not surprising people such as Kirk Cameron and Ray Comfort attack evolution in a way by strawmanning it, leading to the ever-famous crocoduck. What the suggestion of a transitional species between a crocodile and the duck seeks to do is to ridicule the idea of evolution by misinforming the audience on how either species has evolved. Evolution is not the transition between current species, but the divergent from common ancestors into all variations of the living world. Birds are descendants of bird-hipped dinosaurs. All dinosaur species, however, alongside the flying reptiles pterosaurs and the crocodilians, are all derived from one common ancestral group from the archosaur clade. So this idea of a crocoduck put forward by Kirk Cameron and Ray Comfort is no more than either a lack of understanding of evolution, or more likely a lie, and a blatant one at that. Another area where Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron have supplied false information is with the notorious banana, aka the atheist's worst nightmare, in which they attempt to use the fact that the banana is just so perfect for us to hold and consume that it must have been created by a god intending it as a food source. What Ray doesn't seem to know is that bananas are not naturally like that, and have been cultivated that way by many years of selective breeding. Overall, Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron's track record of giving false evidence has led them to become a source of comedy for the non-Christian communities. But what is truly amazing is that we do hear people talking about transitional species such as the crocoduck, and that people are buying their merchandise. What this means is, as foolish as they are, more fools are in turn following them.
It's not hard to see from these cases why, in recent years, tension between the online Christian community and other communities have risen. Though many Christians will most likely respond to the cases put forth in this video as a small portion of the Christian community, I'd like to pose this to those people. If you dislike the items displayed in this video, why don't you take an active role in fighting these aspects? Why don't you make your voice heard? Because currently, the number of those taking action on the Christian side are barely noticeable. They're having an armchair revolution, whilst the people, such as those mentioned in this video, are changing laws and withholding human rights. Want a different picture of Christianity? Well, you have to make it so. As if all those who claim to be moderate Christians actually took action, this would all be over with quickly. Thank you all for watching. Please rate, comment and share.
On questions of celestial mechanics, medieval theologians, such as Calvin and Luther, approached the scriptures assuming that the portrait of creation given to us by the Bible should match the portrait of creation given to us by science. Rather than look up into the heavens for an answer to the question of Earth's movement, as Galileo did, they looked down into their Bibles for the answer.
We get up Sunday morning and we're heeding Jesus' warning so we don't end up in hell forever. 'Cause there's a Savior up above who's supposedly for love, and we got ties to God that we'll never sever. And if we're at church on time, we can get a seat by 9 and put our kids in Sunday school today. Don't you bother getting smart if you've got Jesus in your heart. You're saved unless, of course, you're a gay. And we'll be making sure they're Christian every day. Making sure they're Christian anyway. Making sure they're Christian before 9. Making sure they're Christian and praising Jesus Christ. Look out!
It is angels who make Saturn, Jupiter, the Sun, etc. turn round. If the Earth revolves, it must also have an angel in the center to set it in motion. But only devils live there. It would therefore be a devil who would impart motion to the Earth.
If you want a Christian nation, then you're for indoctrination, and you can keep your kids in a homeschool. Give them a second-class degree from a university like Oral Roberts and be proud of your gene pool. And when they get outside and they figured out you lied, just tell them that their God made all men. that you can just sit back and smile, because in a little while you'll have grandkids and you'll do it again.